I got the invitation to go on this Armed Lutheran radio show, though. You know this guy? Have you seen this? There's two things that I would like to say that make me feel safe. Number one, the fact that there is a radio show called the Armed Lutheran Podcast somewhere in the world. That makes me feel safe.
Bringing you law, gospel, and guns. Welcome to Armed Lutheran Radio.
Hi folks, welcome to Armed Lutheran Radio, a show about guns, hunting, competitive shooting, the natural right of self-defense, and what God's Word says about the issues surrounding gun rights and gun ownership. I'm your host, Lloyd Bailey, the Armed Lutheran, and this is episode number 148, brought to you by Cook's Holsters, American-made custom Kydex holsters with a lifetime warranty and a 100% satisfaction guarantee. Check them out at cooksholsters.com. Use the promo code ARMEDPODCAST and save 15% off your order. That's at cooksholsters.com. Use the promo code ARMEDPODCAST. Again, welcome, and thank you for listening. Thank you for making Armed Lutheran Radio a part of your week. As I mentioned last week, today we have a best of show, today featuring segments from our first year back in 2016. We've got tips from Sergeant Bill from episode 12, from our former contributor Aaron Israel from episode 146, from Mia Anstein's very first episode, her first tip from episode 29, and our first guest interview with Pastor Bryan Wolfmueller from episode 17, where we discussed the three estates and how they relate to self-defense. For newer listeners who have never heard these episodes or these segments, you're in for a treat. These are all great segments, great content. And for longtime listeners, maybe you haven't heard these in a while, these will bring back some good memories. If you would like to have easy access to every segment, every interview, every full-length interview, and segments of Clinging to God and Guns, check out the Reformation Gun Club. For as little as $24 a year, you get all of this plus some cool swag, member discounts from Talon gun grips, inline fabrication, gun box gun safes, and many more, plus exclusive content never released on the podcast. Check it out at gunclub.armedlutheran.us to find out more. Now, next week, we're going to have another best of show, probably best of 2017, and then our Christmas story show is going to be episode 150 on Christmas Eve. That'll be the 23rd of December. And before we get started, one thing I'd like to ask, if you like the show, if you enjoy the content that we're providing for you every week, share this show with your friends, with your church family, with your family on social media. Drop by iTunes and leave us a review. We would really appreciate that. Or visit our feedback page, armedlutheran.us/feedback, and send us a comment or a question. We would love to hear from you. Alrighty then, that's enough of all that. Let's get right to it. Enjoy today's Best of Show. Let me take a minute to tell you a little bit about our good friends at G4G Guns. After surviving an attempted kidnapping and having co-workers robbed at gunpoint, Patrick and Cassie Coburn decided to get a gun for protection, and that led them to teach others about the need to protect themselves and to be proficient with firearms, and that led to the creation of G4G Guns. It's an amazing store and an even more amazing website where you can shop for any gun, ammunition, accessories from the comfort of your own home and buy without any gimmicks or credit card fees. If you want the personal touch, visit their store at 175 Bear Road in Van Alstyne, Texas, or stop by and see them at a gun show near you on the weekends. They're great people. They offer great service, great prices, an amazing selection, and no hidden fees or gimmicks. Check them out at g4gguns.com. That's G, the number 4, gguns.com. G for G Guns, the galaxy for great guns. g4gguns.com.
Time now for another Ballistic Minute with Sergeant Bill Sylvia.
This is Sergeant Bill. Today's topic, trigger control. When I think of trigger control, I think of a triangle with your stance and your grip on the bottom of the triangle, the bottom corners, and on the very top is trigger control, pressing the trigger. So stance is the base, it's your foundation. Your grip is the control. It's how you control the gun, control recoil, control where you're aiming. The trigger press is number one. It's the most important. The trigger press is the action or the activator, the activation of your pistol. It's on top because it's the most important. Because you can have a bad stance and a good grip, or you can have a bad grip and a good stance, or you can have a bad stance and a bad grip. But if you have a good trigger press, more than likely you're going to have a good shot. It influences your shot, your sight picture, the most out of those three fundamentals. Now, the first thing you need to do is you need to learn your trigger press of your particular gun. By learning it, I mean you need to learn where the wall of your trigger is, which is when you're pressing the trigger. Most triggers, whether it's a single action, a double action only, or whatever it may be, it's going to have a little bit of take up, and it's going to come to a spot where it's going to get a little bit heavier just before the trigger breaks. That is the wall. You need to learn where in your trigger to feel that wall, where it's at, so that you can get right to it. You can practice that without even looking at the sights, just having the gun basically not even in your line of sight. You're just going to press the trigger till it gets to that wall, to just before it breaks, and then let it loose and then do it again. By practicing that, you'll learn where the wall of that particular trigger is. There are many different schools of thought on trigger press, how you should do it, how you shouldn't do it, pin and reset, prep and pull. There's lots of different ways that people have come up with how to do it. I pretty much, in my experience, have boiled it down to three basic trigger presses. The number one is the slow press or the surprise break. That's what everybody thinks of that when they're first taught how to shoot a rifle or a handgun or whatever it may be. You're slowly pressing the trigger back, you're pressing it straight back, and you want it to, when the trigger breaks, it should surprise you. Well, if you've already learned where the wall of your trigger is, it shouldn't surprise you. But that's how most people get the most accuracy, by doing a slow trigger press all the way back and just having it break when it breaks. The second is what I call prep press. You're prepping the trigger, you're pulling it back to right about where that wall is, and then you pause there for any amount of time you feel necessary to get your sight picture where you want it, and then you're pressing it through. This is probably not as accurate as a slow press, but with practice can be extremely accurate. The third is what I call the fast full press. Some people call it sweeping the trigger or slapping the trigger. I don't really like the term slapping the trigger because that denotes that terminology is most firearms instructors or just shooters will use as if you slap the trigger, you're not hitting the trigger properly, you're not activating it properly, you're pressing it off left to the right, or it causes a lot of bad things. So think of it as sweeping the trigger. So what you're going to do on that fast full press is you're going to take your finger from out of the trigger guard, and it's going to go straight to the trigger and go and quickly, very fast, you're going to sweep through the whole trigger press. You're going to roll right through it really quickly. It's the fastest, but probably the least accurate. But with practice, just like any of the others, it can be very accurate as well. Now, if you have several different guns, practice with the several different guns. If they have different triggers, all the better. I practice with single action 1911s, safe action Glocks, some of them that are stock, some of them that are not stock triggers, double action only pistols, double single pistols that I have, and even revolver triggers. They're all going to be slightly different, but you can learn with a little bit of practice where the wall is on each one of these, and you can practice those 3 different types of trigger presses so that you will be able to control that trigger and make that gun go off when you want it to and how you want it to. The key to trigger control is practice. Like I said, first you got to learn where the wall is, and then you just got to practice. You know, the slow prep press, that surprise break, may be for using for longer shots. The prep press may be middle range distance shots for you, and then that trigger sweep or the fast full press you might use on targets that are really close and you're shooting really fast. Some instructors will talk about a pin and reset technique, and there's lots of different names for it, but basically what it is when you pull the trigger, the firearm goes off, you pin the trigger all the way back as it goes off, you hold it there, you get back on your sight picture, and then you're letting the trigger out only to the reset. A quick little thing that you can show that this is not a very fast trigger technique: put your hand flat on a table, take your index finger and try to tap it at a fast pace as far as you can raise your finger up, and then try to do it with only allowing your finger to go maybe a ½ inch off the table. They're going to be about the same speed. It actually takes a lot more discipline, a lot more practice, and is a lot more difficult to make that finger go just a short distance, just to only go to the reset of that trigger. It may be more accurate, but it takes a lot more work, and I don't find that it works for me. Give it a shot. Maybe it works for you. Above all, practice. You got to practice if you want to be good. You got to practice if you want to be competent. So you determine your level of practice, you determine your level of competency. This has been your Ballistic Minute with Sergeant Bill. Keep on practicing.
Sergeant Bill Sylvia is a veteran of the Dallas Police Department and masterclass competitive shooter. You can watch Sergeant Bill's shooting videos at armedlutheran.us/Sergeant Bill.
I want to take a minute here to thank our partner, the Armed Citizens Legal Defense Network. If you're involved in a situation where you have to use your firearm in self-defense, you very well may find yourself in a legal battle against overzealous prosecutors or the families of the criminal who you shot or threatened, who are looking to deprive you of your freedom or your hard-earned savings. You may find yourself charged with a crime or facing a civil lawsuit even if you did nothing wrong. That's where Armed Citizens Legal Defense Network comes in. For a small yearly fee, they will provide you with money for attorneys, money for bail, consultations, and access to experts like Marty Hayes and Massad Ayub. Don't face the fight alone. Visit Armed Citizens Network today. Use the promo code ARMEDLutheran-25. Save $25 off your first year's membership, or you can grab the coupon on my website, armedlutheran.us. Sign up today. They will send you lots of cool resources, 8 instructional DVDs, and a book by Massad Ayub that I cannot recommend highly enough. Don't wait until you need their help. Be prepared. Sign up today. Visit armedcitizensnetwork.org.
It's time for this week's self-defense tip from Aaron Israel of Fundamental Defense.
Hey folks, this is Aaron Israel with Fundamental Defense here with your personal defense tip of the week. This week I want to talk to you about getting to know your neighbors as a personal defense strategy. Now I know a lot of folks, especially in the gun community, who consider themselves some level of prepper. Now while that word may have a negative connotation to it with the way that reality shows portray preppers as crazy people with bunkers and basements full of 10,000 cans of SpaghettiOs, prepping really just means to be prepared for bad situations that may happen in life. And it's good to be prepared for those things because they do happen. TV may make you think about being prepared for the zombie apocalypse or a government economic collapse, whatever you want to envision in your imagination, but really, there are other things that are far more likely to happen, such as floods, tornadoes, riots, etc., that we see happening in the news all the time, that it would be good to be prepared for. One thing I hear a lot of people that consider themselves preppers saying is that they plan to bug out or get out of Dodge. They have their bug out bag and they're going to roll out to their compound. Maybe they've got some land out in a rural area and they're going to wait out the disaster out there, and they're going to escape the inner city and move out to where things are safer out in the country, to their compound and that sort of thing. I'm going to submit to you that when you consider the wide array of things that could happen from the context of a worst-case scenario, in almost all of them, that's going to be a less than optimal idea. If you look at communities that have been through natural disasters and survived civil unrest, you find out that it was the communities that banded together as fellow citizens that survived and recovered at a far higher rate than those that did not. Just compare the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina and the aftermath of the tornadoes that devastated Moore, Oklahoma. Now, those are different types of disasters, and you always have to evacuate before a hurricane, but it's what happened afterwards that showed you the strength of the two communities, or the lack thereof. There's still parts of New Orleans that are torn up from the hurricane when, as quickly as a month after the tornadoes in Moore, Oklahoma, you had to squint to be able to see the devastation because people had cleaned it up, because they came together as a community and took care of each other and rebuilt and had that resolved. The reason is because neighbors helped neighbors and leaned on each other and pitched in to make it through that horrible situation in Oklahoma, whereas a lot of the folks in New Orleans were just waiting on the government to step in, or got out of Dodge and never went back, and came to Texas and Oklahoma and neighboring states and never went back to rebuild. Now, obviously, if there's a hurricane and you're told to evacuate, you should do that without hesitation. I'm not telling you to hunker down during a hurricane. That's probably a dumb idea. But even that is going to be you and your neighbors who come together to board up the windows and set up the sandbags, and then you can safely caravan out of town, talking to each other and coordinating and getting out of there in a safe and efficient way because you band together. It's going to be you and your neighbors who then go in and rebuild as soon as the authorities give the all clear. They, by and large, didn't do that after Hurricane Katrina, which is why there's still some devastation there, as many years as it's been since then. But in Oklahoma, they did, and it's communities full of neighbors who took care of each other that made the big difference. So what does this mean to you as a person who cares about personal defense and being prepared? Well, I would argue that it's your relationships with the people in your community and your neighbors that are going to increase your survivability in almost any disaster situation that could happen, from tornadoes all the way to the apocalyptical situations. Banding together your resources and hunkering down while things are bad and helping each other rebuild when the tragedy ends, which all these things come to an end regardless of what they are, that's what being in a civil society is all about. And there's still going to be civil society even if the worst case scenario economic collapse comes around. And that society is going to be neighbors taking care of each other just like they always have. And that goes for the more far-fetched situations as well as the natural disasters. Consider this: if you're planning on bugging out, I was in more danger on the road in Iraq than I ever was at my forward operating base. Why was that? Well, on the road, I'm isolated in a smaller element, usually a platoon size or smaller. Think of you and just your family members. And I'm vulnerable and only can survive for as long as the things that I'm carrying on my back will last me. So when I was on the FOB, I could pull together resources from the larger element, mount a bigger defense, have a central resupply point, coordinate all the resources that we had for air support and all that. And on the road, that's where firefights are happening in war zones, because you're vulnerable out there and you only have the things that you're carrying. So if you have some retreat that you plan to get to in a worst case scenario, some place in the country where you're going to go, you still have to survive the transit to that retreat in order for that to work. And the transit is where you're the most vulnerable and where you're the most likely to be in a bad situation. So I would argue that you're better off in most situations hunkering down and working with the people around you to mount the best defense and to pull your resources to survive. That being said, you can't expect to band together with your neighbors if you don't know them. So if you care about personal defense and survival, go out and make friends with the people that you live around, your neighbors and your community. The same people who you would borrow a cup of sugar from today, or they would borrow one from you, are the same ones who might have the only generator and running water when the grid goes down, if that were to happen. So think about being prepared for a disaster of any sort and understand that it's the communities that come together that survive and rebuild more often than not. So go out, be friendly, and meet your neighbors. And it's not only the right thing to do from a personal defense perspective. Since we're on the Armed Lutheran podcast here, it's also the Christian thing to do as well. So remember that whole "Go ye therefore Great Commission" command. Embrace it, and we can all survive even the worst situations. And that's your personal defense tip of the week. Thanks for tuning in.
Hey guys, it's Mia here. If you follow me on social media, you know that I often share morning inspiration. Many people ask how I can keep this up every day. Well, it starts with my morning readings and that perfect cup of coffee. The official Dunkin' Donuts shop provides coffee lovers with everything they need, from K-Cup pods, original blended coffee, tea, drinkware, and more. Who doesn't want Dunkin' delivered to their front door? Shop today at www.armedlutheran.us/coffee and help support Armed Lutheran Radio today.
Up next, it's Mia's Motivations with Mia Anstein.
Hello, everybody. I hope you are all having an outstanding day. I am happy to be here chatting with you, and today I wanted to share a shooting tip. A while back, Lloyd and I were discussing the Remington Arms little RM380 pistol, and this little gun feels outstanding in your hand. Its all-metal frame is very comfortable, and while we were chatting, we also discussed the trigger pull on this little pistol. The pistol does have a long trigger pull, so it leads me to want to discuss with you exactly where do you put your trigger finger on the trigger when you're shooting a pistol. Now, there are debates constantly about where exactly the trigger finger should go, and some people say it's in the middle of the pad of your trigger finger. Others say it's at the crease of the first joint of your trigger finger. This little gun will teach you that actually will vary. In order to take up the slack of the trigger pull on this pistol, if you have long fingers, you're going to want to insert your finger a little further into the trigger. So what I'm suggesting is you may want to try some safe dry fire drills before you head to the range. Test this out in a safe location and vary your trigger finger on the trigger as you depress it. Try it in the middle of the pad, pull, shoot. Scoot your finger in just a little further, pull back till the hammer goes. Then maybe try it at the crease, pull back, and see how that goes. The whole idea is you want to be pulling slowly until you take up this slack. You want to pull up that slack and then pull steady until the hammer actually strikes. You want to do this without varying your sights on target. So first of all, practice some dry fire drills so that you can get comfortable with your grip and where the trigger finger is going to be on the trigger. Then, as you head out to the range, practice on target. Let's see what is going to work best for you. Is the middle of the pad a little further, or is that crease going to be the location for you with your size hands? I hope this really helps you in your shooting tips in some of these subcompact guns. And be safe at the range. Talk to you later. Have a great day.
You can read more from Mia and watch her YouTube videos at miaanstein.com.
Let me take a moment to tell you about our good friends at cooksholsters.com. Not only are they a sponsor of the show and the Armed Lutheran Radio shooting team, they're a company that I trust and believe in. Why? Well, when I first got into concealed carry, when I got my concealed carry permit, it was really amazing how much I didn't know. I picked up a holster from my local range, one of those cheap prophylactic holsters, you know the kind. They collapse when you take the gun out. You can't reholster them safely. I have to admit, I was one of those guys. When I started learning more and taking classes and reading and watching videos, I found out that there are better holsters out there. I learned about the advantage of Kydex holsters, and that's how I discovered Cook's Holsters. What makes Cook so special as opposed to other holster makers? They make an outstanding product. They sell printed Kydex to many of the other holster makers, and their subsidiary business, Cook's Molds, actually makes the molds that other holster manufacturers use. Cook's Holsters is an American success story. Born in the founder's basement, Cook's Holsters grew so much that Mr. Cook left his job to make holsters full-time, and he hired people to help fill orders and meet demand. Custom molded to fit your firearm, Cook's Holsters are available in a wide array of colors and printed patterns, including your own artwork. They're available for carry, for range work, and for competition. Check them out at cooksholsters.com. They're adding new gun models every month. I trust them for everyday carry and for competition. Visit them today. Use the promo code ARMEDPODCAST and save save 15% off your order. They offer a lifetime warranty and a 100% money-back guarantee if you're not satisfied. Check them out at cooksholsters.com.
This is Cheryl Todd of Gun Freedom Radio.
And I'm the other guy, Dan Todd, reminding you that we and the show you are listening to are proud members of the Self-Defense Radio Network.
Find out more and check out all of the other great shows and content at selfdefenseradio.net.
Welcome back to Armed Lutheran Radio. Our guest today is quite possibly the busiest Lutheran pastor on the planet. Since 2005, he served as the pastor of Hope Lutheran Church in Aurora, Colorado. He is the Wolf in Wolfson Creative, a provider of some really fantastic electronic church documents like marriage, baptismal, and confirmation certificates. He's involved with the Around the Word weekly devotions and weekly Bible study. He's got another podcast where he reads from the sermons of Martin Luther. He's a cool series of videos called Grappling with the Text on the World Everlasting YouTube channel, where he gets to show off his artistic abilities. He's the co-host of one of my favorite podcasts, Table Talk Radio with Pastor Evan Gegline. He is the Iron Preacher, the Theological Bull Rider, the Praise Song Cruncher, and Master of Mediocrity. Pastor Bryan Wolfmueller, welcome to Armed Lutheran Radio.
Wow, that does make me sound busy.
Well, how do you find the time to do all this stuff?
I'm lucky that theology for me is a hobby. You know, it's what I would do if I was doing anything else. In fact, before I was a pastor, before I went to seminary, I'd read theology and write and think about these things for fun. And so for me, I can't tell where work ends and where hobby begins, which is good for me. It's maybe not so good for my wife sometimes, because she can't tell if I'm working or goofing off, because it often looks like the same exact thing.
So how did you get to know Pastor Gegline, and where did you guys get the idea for this game show as a way of teaching Lutheran doctrine?
Yeah, Table Talk Radio began really with just Evan when he had finished his undergrad at Kansas and was back here in Colorado, Yuma, Colorado, where his hometown, for the summer before he went to seminary in Fort Wayne. And he had done a radio show at the local radio station in high school. And so he was back for the summer, and he picked that up on Saturday morning. He had a 2-hour show. It was really formatted like Issues, Etc. It was a theological interview show, and he was just basically picking off guests off of Issues, Etc. and asking him to come on. So I went on his show a couple of times, and we got to know each other. He came down, we visited, we met, I met his family and became friends. Kept in touch as he went away to the seminary, and we were talking one day, and he was working on a project for an evangelism class, and he was talking about a radio show, and we were imagining what it might be like. And I said, the thing that nobody has done is a game show where you can have people call in and participate. And the idea originally was that you have these games, and the listeners call in and play along and win prizes, and you use it to teach the distinction between law and gospel and stuff like this. Well,
right.
He actually wrote that up as a project for a class.
Oh,
and when he got an A on it, he called me up and he says, "Hey, well, you want to give it a shot?" So his second year at seminary, we started recording, and our idea was to capitalize. I always remember this. We wanted to capitalize on the success of Issues, Etc. So we recorded our first episode. He was in town for Christmas or for Easter break. We recorded an episode, and then 2 days later found out that Issues, Etc. had been canceled. This was back in that big drama days.
Uh-huh.
And we thought, oh, great. But Pirate Christian Radio came along that summer and brought Issues, Etc. back, and Fighting for the Faith and all these other great shows. And we got on that bandwagon with Table Talk.
Very good.
We've been trying to figure out a way to quit doing it for 6 years now, but we haven't figured out where the breaks are.
It just won't die.
That's right.
Well, it's a great idea. Like I said when I first emailed you, I really enjoy it. I've learned a lot just listening and laughing at you guys, which I know is the whole point. Your speech, I saw a video on YouTube. Your speech at the Steadfast Lutherans Conference about dealing with false doctrine was an inspiration for a monologue that I did on my show a few weeks ago about the temptation to anger and dealing with anti-gunners and social media, which prompted me to contact you for today's show. Today, you suggested a great topic. It's something that not a lot of people have talked about, and I certainly haven't thought a lot about. And I wanted to get you to give us sort of a primer on the Luther's doctrine of the three estates and how it relates to self-defense. Most Lutherans are familiar with the two kingdoms doctrine, but within that, there's the three estates, or the three orders, the home, the state, and the church. How does all this pertain to self-defense?
Right. Well, there's a lot of wonderful things here to think about, because and your question is just perfect, because normally we do think of the two governments, and that's how we kind of think church and state. But the three estates lets us put the family in there, and in fact, it lets us put especially the family in relationship to the state. So let's maybe start with Luther. The idea of the three estates is an old idea. It's not just Lutheran,
right?
But what had happened in the Middle Ages was that they had really had the three estates were the people who fought, the people the people who prayed, and the people who worked. And so the three estates kind of got confused in medieval feudalism, and so you had your priest class, you had your ruling class, and you had your working class.
Right.
Luther looks at the commandments and at the scriptures and understands that no, this is not the best way to think of it. We should rather think of these orders that we all live in. So the order of family, the order of government, the order of rule, and the order of hearing God's word and prayer are things that we all participate in. So I don't have to, for example, to be a monk, I've got to take a vow of poverty, chastity, and obedience. I've got to leave the marketplace and leave the world. There was a question, if soldiers even could be Christians,
right?
And Luther says no, we can live. In fact, all of us live in all three of these orders: the church, the family, and the state.
They overlap.
Yeah, that's right. And so when we consider our vocation in life, we realize that all of us are in a family. I mean, all of us have parents at least, and probably a lot more than that in our families. And all of us live in a state, and we're Christians. We're baptized, so we live also in the church.
So the home produces, the state protects the home, protects the people. The church sort of looks to both the people for members and the state for protection. How does where does the issue of self-defense fit in? I know that the state is the protector. How do we view self-defense in light of those three estates?
Sure. Well, this is another, and really probably Luther's key political insight. If we were to look for where the estates are in the commandments, we see that the church is established in the third commandment. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. What does this mean? We should fear and love God so we don't despise preaching and his word, but gladly hear it, consider it sacred, and gladly hear and learn it.
Right.
So that we go to church. That's a third commandment. But the state and the family are both protected by the fourth commandment, by a singular commandment. So we have there, honor your father and your mother. And Luther teaches us that what this means is we should fear and love God, so we do not despise our parents and other authorities,
right?
But honor them, serve and obey them, love and cherish them. So that family, and especially parent and children, is the fundamental ordering of the world, and the state is an extension of that. So Luther in the Large Catechism, which I think is brilliant, and you can access it, people who are interested in looking at this can probably just Google Luther Large Catechism or go to bookofconcord.org and you can find it there. His discussion of this in the fourth commandment is definitely worth our meditation. But he says that basically the state is nothing other than families getting together to do things that they can't do by themselves, and provide for their children. So we want to teach our children a particular trade or a particular thing that they don't know, that the parents don't know. So the parents get together and they hire a teacher, and now and the teacher teaches the children, and now you have a school. Or the parents want to build a road system for the place where for the neighborhood where they live. Well, it's a little bit out of reach for them to imagine a project that big, so they band together, and now you have a transportation department.
Right.
And especially as the threats get bigger and bigger and bigger, and we realize that the dangers that could come against our families are something that is a little bit bigger than what we can handle, then we hire soldiers, and we have an army to protect us and protect the children, especially.
Right.
But this is the point, is that the authority of violence that belongs to the army is given to them from the family. It's given to them from the parents. So that the authority to defend the life and the chastity and the property of the family belongs especially to the father, to the parents, and that it's only by derivation that is handed over to the government. So the right to bear arms is it's not that the government gives the right to bear arms to the citizen, but rather the opposite. It's the family that has decided that the government should bear arms on their behalf, just like the family has decided that the government can teach the children on their behalf.
Right. So where the threats are not so much external as you would need to deal with them with an army, say violent crime, the primary responsibility for protecting the family falls on the father within the home. And so self-defense or home defense becomes the responsibility of the parents within the home. That's
right. That's exactly right. And it doesn't necessarily become that. I mean, it's what it is.
It's what it is.
It's according to natural law and also to the scripture, that it's one of the chief duties of the family that the children would be then protected. And again, so that's why we also mention life, chastity, and property, because you have the fourth commandment, honor your father and mother, and then you have the fifth commandment, you shall not murder, the sixth commandment, you shall not commit adultery, and the seventh commandment, you shall not steal.
Right.
And those commandments are showing the great gifts of God, life and chastity and property. And so the fourth commandment is there to protect those gifts as well, to make sure that they're not violated, abused, stolen away, etc. So this is the role of the parent, and it should be, and every parent knows this too, that their number one thing that they're doing is keeping their children safe.
Right.
That they survive to adulthood, for example. You got to keep them alive. That's number one.
Right.
If you don't meet that objective, then all the other ones don't matter.
The college fund isn't important if they're not there to cash it in.
That's right.
Exactly.
That's right.
So, and that's interesting you mentioned that, because so many times, and the segment that we do regularly on my show, the Clinging to God and Guns segment, we take articles that are written from a Christian perspective, where they typically take scripture and they try to justify gun control, and they try to take the right to bear arms out of the home and put it exclusively in the hands of the state for the protection of the family. You don't have that right, or shouldn't have that right, to bear arms for the protection of your family. And they tried to use scripture to make that argument. What do you make of those sorts of arguments?
Yeah, it's just a fundamental misunderstanding of what the government is, but it's a fundamental misunderstanding that the government loves.
Right.
Where we see it, and you see it in education stuff all the time, that the government thinks that it's its job to educate children, not the job of the family, and they take that over. Bernie Sanders now is campaigning on free college for everyone, and we said, look at this. You see the problem here. It's not just a seventh commandment, private property, we shouldn't be socialist issue. It's a fourth commandment issue too, because because it assumes that that the government should be paying for education for children. No, this is something that belongs with the family. And it's probably, and I don't know how to stop it. I think at the beginning of the United States, there was a sense of that family was the fundamental structure of society.
Right.
But now it's the individual.
Yes.
That the individual is the basic structure of society, and that's difficult. It's difficult to kind of roll that back and to start seeing the world ordered according to family rather than according to state. But I'm afraid that those articles, at least as you've described them, that's probably one of the essential problems there.
Right, and the thing that I find most frustrating, and it's the same argument every time. Almost every article that we go through falls back on the turn the other cheek, or the last week's was the put away your sword from the Garden of Gethsemane, or what's the other one? Blessed are the peacemakers. I mean, you name it. They go down the list and they cull out one simple. Oh, the fun one that we did a few weeks ago was the one about beating your swords into plowshares. Right. As though that was something that Christ calls on us to do, and the author of the article talked about how they felt like they were participating in the redemptive work of Christ by standing there and beating these guns into tools.
Oh, sheesh. What tools were they making? Like little hammers?
They were making garden tools to be shipped off to the third world.
Oh, for heaven's sake. Well, now look, so the three estates can help with this, because, I mean, this is really kind of a return to monasticism, which the evangelical Christianity has done. In the Middle Ages, you were a soldier or you were a monk, and you couldn't participate in both. You couldn't live in all three estates. And so modern Christianity has that confusion. When Jesus says turn the other cheek, he's not saying that he's speaking of your life as a Christian. But we have, in some ways, we have three lives. We have a life as a Christian, we have a life as a citizen, and we have a life in the state. And my reaction to something is going to be different depending on the different vocation. If someone just comes up and someone off the street comes up and just says, "Hey, you ran a mile, run another mile," or "I want to slap you twice," I don't let them slap me. I mean, that's what you don't have the authority to slap me around. Now, when for some reason a policeman, and if they have the authority to cause me to run or to carry stuff for them or whatever, which they in fact don't around here, not yet anyways, but let's just say they do, like the Roman soldiers in Jerusalem. They have the authority from the state to demand those sorts of things, and then I can be obedient to their request, especially if they're doing it as a Christian. You see, this is what the original martyrs who died for their faith. They were suffering a capital. They suffered capital punishment from a government for being Christian.
Right.
So if someone comes up and they say, well, if someone comes up and says, "Hey, give me all your money," they're robbing me, and I say, "Well, who are you? What? No, you can't. You're just a thief. You can't have my stuff."
Right.
Now, if the government comes to seize my property, now that becomes a different question, because apparently they can give themselves that authority to do that. And now I have another question. Is my property being seized in my office of father, or is my property being seized in the office of Christian? And if the government has made it illegal for me to be a Christian, or illegal to preach the truth of God's word, and they're going to come and find me or throw me in jail because of my Christian faith, then I gladly submit to that fine or punishment, or I go to jail or whatever. Right. I do that as a Christian. But if they're just coming to do it because they're socialists and I'm a father, then no. I act according to the office of father, and I say, you're out of place. So the peacefulness that Jesus is calling us to, and the nonviolence that Jesus is calling us to, is according to our office of Christian. But the fact that we do defend ourselves, our families, and our families' chastity and life and property, is according to my office a father, and I can be both. I can be both a father and a Christian. And so I can be both a soldier and a Christian. I can be both a judge and a Christian. I can be both a property owner and a Christian. And I'm afraid that these people who say that the Christian shouldn't have guns would not say that the Christian shouldn't live in a society without police, or they shouldn't live in a society without judges, or this sort of thing. But it's the same. It is the same authority coming from the same place.
Right.
I'll tell you my best argument against guns, though. You want to hear it?
Okay.
Because the understanding that we have the right to self-defense and the authority to defend our family, life, property, chastity, comes from an understanding of that we are human beings, that we are created in God's image, and that we have a natural law. And the way I think the way to undo gun control is to dehumanize people. In other words, you wouldn't give guns to monkeys or apes at the zoo. It would be an absolute disaster. But the more and more we act like apes, and the more and more our ideology says that we are apes, then the point is, well, you shouldn't give guns to apes. So I think there should be a test when you go to apply for a concealed carry or whatever, and it should say, "Do you believe in evolution?" And if you do, you don't get a gun.
I love it.
But you see, that's the point. Is that all this violence comes not from people being family and having a right understanding of humanity and all of this sort of stuff. I mean, the kind of crazy gun violence that we see is
from the dehumanizing of other people. That's exactly that's exactly it. That's great. I would love to see that on an application.
Do you believe in evolution? Sorry, buddy, you got to defend yourself with a stick.
That's right. Here,
go and garden. We got some garden tools for you.
That's right. Here's a quote from the article that we fisked last week. That there's always this argument that Christ is the Prince of Peace, and therefore we should model ourselves after him, and therefore we should love our neighbors even if our neighbors are trying to kill us. That we should show our love for our fellow man even when faced with evil. And there was an article that we did from the Dominican Sisters of Peace last week that and the quote that was kind of typical: "Let us follow Jesus and preach and act with a holy fire against the carrying and firing of guns all around us. When Jesus' disciple Peter struck Malchus with a sword, slicing off his ear in self-defense, Jesus said, 'Put your sword back in its sheath. Let us join with our Lord and say together, sheath your weapons.'"
Well, see, I mean, so that example of Peter in the garden, look, the people that came to arrest Jesus, now, I mean, we can have some debate about this, but it was not just a band of thugs, it was soldiers dispatched from the high priest.
Right.
It was a right authority there, and they were coming to arrest Jesus precisely because of his confession that he was the Christ. If some band of ruffians would have come along, from just take the parable of the Good Samaritan, where this guy is walking along and he finds this guy beaten and half dead on the side of the street. Well, what happens if he comes along as the guy's being beaten and robbed? What should he do? Wait for them to finish beating and robbing him before he then goes to help him? No. If the Good Samaritan shows up about half an hour earlier, he's probably throwing rocks at people, getting them off of this guy to protect him.
Exactly.
So, it's not a surprise that we hear this sort of thing from a Catholic order, because they, again, don't have this understanding of the three estates and the way that we can participate in all of them. But we should be a little bit more clear and subtle in our reading of the Scripture to understand that, there is a time when we are called to sheath our weapons. There would be a way that when the government, for example, if the government were to make it illegal for Christians to own weapons, I can't, this, who knows if something like this might happen, then we got to think about that a little bit. And that might actually be a thing where we submit to that kind of nonsense. And because of our Christian confession.
Right.
But if the government just says that, hey, you're a father and therefore shouldn't have these things, or we should have all the authority, we alone have the office of violence and not you, then we have to resist that sort of argument as not only against the Scripture but also against natural law.
Right. Very good. Well, thank you so much for taking a few minutes out of your very busy day to give us some insight into the Three Estates Doctrine and how it can inform our understanding of self-defense and gun control. And I hope this has been enlightening for our listeners. I'm sure it has. It has been for me.
Good.
Thank you again. And I hope
you're most welcome. I mean, there's wonderful treasures in our Lutheran theology, and every time we're back to them, I mean, even something as foundational as the Large Catechism, we find riches there, almost beyond measure. And God be praised for that. And I'm excited to know what you're up to. And I'm going to listen to some of these shows and see. This sounds like a great project. So God bless you and the work that you're doing too.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And I hope you'll come on again.
Oh yeah, no problem.
Great. Thank you very much. Pastor Bryan Wolfmueller, thank you so much for joining us. God bless you, and keep up all the great mediocrity on Table Talk Radio. Say hi to Pastor Gegline for us, and we'll be listening for and looking forward to all the things that you're doing everywhere, seems like.
Yeah, will do. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And that's going to wrap it up for this week's show. Thank you all for listening, for downloading, for subscribing. Thank you to our fine sponsors who make all this possible. Thank you to my awesome cast of contributors. And thank you, dear listener, for listening, for downloading, for subscribing. I hope you'll join us again next week. Until then, keep shooting, keep praying. We'll talk to you next time.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Armed Lutheran Radio. For show notes, be sure to visit our website at www.armedlutheran.us. You can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher Radio, and TuneIn. This podcast is made possible by Cook's Holsters and contributions from listeners like you.